We are the aeons of God. Genesis chapter 22 and verse 17. An opening reading from the second book of Enoch, chapter 65 and verse 3. And the Lord, that is Yahweh, broke up the age for the sake of man, and divided into times, and from the times he established years, and from the years he set months, and from the months days, and he set the 7 days, and in them he set hours and minutes, and measured the hours, so that a person might think about time, and so that he might count the years and the months and the days and the hours and the perturbations and the beginnings and the ends, and that he might keep count of his own life from the beginning unto death. So now we'll compare this reading from the second book of Enoch with a reading from the Tripartite Tractate from the Nag Hammadi Library. Just as the present aeon, though a unity, is divided by units of time, and units of time are divided into years, and years are divided into seasons, and seasons into months, and months into days, and days into hours, and hours into moments, so too the aeon of truth, since it is a unity and multiplicity, receives honour in the small and the great names according to the power of each to grasp it. By way of analogy, like a spring, which is what it is, yet flows into streams and lakes and canals and branches, or like a root spread out beneath trees and branches with its fruit, or like a human body which is partitioned in an indivisible way into members of members, primary members and secondary, great and small. So what's being said here in the Tripartite Tractate is there is the definition of time, and time is not a measure of numbers, but rather time is a measure of individuality, and having those individual experiences is what passes time. By way of analogy, like a spring, which is what it is, it flows into streams and lakes and canals and branches, so that the passing of a stream of experience, that is time. Noting that the aeons are the materialization of motion, being time. Time is the motion of the sun, moon and stars in relation to one another. See Psalm 104 and verse 19. He has made the moon for appointed times. The sun itself knows well where it sets. The planetary luminaries of the sun and the moon define years and months. The earth itself defines days, although it is the rotation with respect to the sun that we actually see. So a day is one time of the earth around itself. A month is one time of the moon around the earth. A year is one time of the earth around the sun. All three are times of revolution, cycles. These are God's celestial time pieces. In scientific terms, a time is a cycle. So, in the Bible, a time can stand literally or symbolically for a day, a month, or a year, occasionally an hour. So that was the meaning then of literal time. Now we're going to look at spiritual time. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. That was Genesis chapter 1 verses 14 to 15, and now reading from Genesis chapter 22 and verse 17. In blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. God himself is the great light, which the earthly sun symbolizes. Mother Wisdom is symbolized by the moon, and the stars are human beings. And in that regard, the figure of man is shaped like a five-pointed star. Our numbers and our work constitute days, seasons, and years. In our world, men use clocks, watches, sundials, and hourglasses to mark time. Spiritually speaking, each son and daughter of God is a sun and moon pair, as 1 day of spiritual time is the equivalent of 1,000 earthly years. No man has made it alive down here for a full day. Adam and Methuselah came close, but their time was cut short because of the introduction of sin. One looks at a watch in order to tell the time. Heavenly watchers look at men below to observe our motions, works. Because all men are watched by the heavenly host, we are all human watches designating time. Watches tick, and so do fleshly watches. Our hearts beat daily as time goes by. When our hearts stop beating, the watch stops and time is up. See Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 25, the book of Daniel chapter 7 and verse 4, and the book of Revelation chapter 13 verses 4 to 7. We are signs and seasons. Listen, High Priest Joshua, you and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of things to come. I am going to bring my servant, the branch. Zechariah chapter 3 and verse 8. Compare Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 18, Isaiah chapter 20 and verse 3, the book of Ezekiel and chapter 12 and verse 11, and chapter 24 and verse 24. God uses the true believers to be signs to other true believers, and to also be signs to the kingdoms of this world, and as markers for the watching host above. Abraham was made into a sign by God, symbolizing faith. Moses was made into a very important sign to Pharaoh and later generations. Moses was made into a very important sign to Pharaoh and later generations. Exodus chapter 7 and verse 1. The most famous sign was Jesus himself. Everything he did or said has very great importance and impact for humanity and the revelation of judgment. See Revelation chapter 17 and verse 15 and Revelation chapter 10 and verse 11. A reading now from the Odes of Solomon, Ode 12. He filled me with words of truth that I may proclaim him, and like the flowing of waters, truth flows from my mouth, and my lips declare his fruits. And he has caused his knowledge to abound in me, because the mouth of the Lord is the true word, and the entrance of his light. And the Most High has given him to his generations, or ages, or the aeons, which are the interpreters of his beauty, the keys of knowledge found within his word, and the narrators of his glory, and the confessors of his purpose, and the preachers of his mind, and the teachers of his works. For the swiftness of the word is inexpressible, and like its expression is its swiftness and force, and its course knows no limit. Neither does it fail, but it stands sure, and one cannot comprehend its descent or its way. For as its work is, so is its end. For it is light and the dawning of thought, and by it, that is the word, the generations, the ages, the aeons spoke to one another, and those that were silent acquired speech. The aeons are personified in the Odes of Solomon, the generation of past and future aeons. See Ode 12 verses 4 and 8, are represented as some of them speaking while others are silent. The generations are past and future aeons of believers, the elect. They speak to each other by the word, the prophetic message of the scriptures. So here in the Odes of Solomon, in Ode 12, the aeons are persons. We can compare this with Ode 7 and verse 11, the Pleroma of the aeons and their father. So the aeons are personifications of the true believers. They receive the word by which they speak to each other. The Father is actively carrying out his thought of redemption by the word through the aeons. When Abraham believed, nothing outward and visible took place then, but inwardly and invisibly a new spiritual period began, the period or age, aeon, of faith. Such an age is not measured by days or years or by time at all, for time depends on physical motion. Here we are talking about spiritual motion. When Abraham believed, the aeon of faith began. The 12 apostles also symbolized some of the emanations of the aeons, the dodecad, the 12 aeons. Now you have to remember the aeons are emanated in male and female pairs. So to be in harmony with this, I think we should choose 6 apostles and 6 female disciples. These are also described as prophets and deacons in the New Testament. So how do the aeons speak to each other? Well, as I've already said, it is by the word of God and by faith. Our spiritual man is not limited by the bond of space. Thus Paul was boldly absent from Corinth, but present in spirit. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 3, his spiritual man was present with them. It was the same with Colossians. I am absent in the flesh, yet I am with you in the spirit. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 5. When our spiritual man groans, Christ groans too in heaven. an infinite distance away. Romans chapter 8 and verse 23. Compare verse 26. There is no time barrier either. Thus our spiritual man is in close fellowship with the spirits of just men made perfect, having died many years ago. See Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 23. This is the glorious unity of the Spirit. We are not just connected with living saints, wherever they may be, but with the spiritual characters of all true saints throughout history.